When I was 8, my family moved to Kansas City. The house we rented was in an old residential neighborhood and was a hulking yellow Victorian monster. It was built somewhere around 1920 according to public records, and at one point was a doctor's office. It was 3 stories, the basement, the ground floor that included a living room, dining room and kitchen, and the top floor that held the bedrooms and the bathroom. When we first moved in, I immediately clocked the basement as creepy as hell. It was unfinished, the stone walls flaky and crumbling, the concrete floor cracked and uneven, the single bulb flickered and crackled. In short, it scared the hell out of me. The fuse box, yeah, that old, was located in the basement as well, in a little wooden cubicle laden with decades-old cobwebs and bug carcasses. I called it the kneel and pray room because it looked like the little closet Carrie's mother, from the Stephen King movie, kept her in to keep her from going to the prom. One night, after about 2 weeks of being there, a fuse blew. Only my mum and I were home at the time, and she was on a ladder upstairs painting the ceiling. She yelled downstairs for me to get the flashlight from the kitchen drawer and come to where she was. The basement stairs were right next to the drawer I had to get the flashlight from, and the door was open, creating a dark, gaping maw of a hole. It took all my little 8-year-old courage to sprint across the kitchen towards that door. I jerked the drawer open and quickly realized the flashlight wasn't there. I ran back to the stairs and yell up that it isn't there. "It must be in the basement from when I was fixing the dryer. Run down and get it," she said. Immediately, fear sweat. "It's dark, Mum. I can't see," I whined pathetically. "It's on the workbench. Light a candle and go get it. I can't believe you're still afraid of the dark." A little more back and forth happens until my mum gets frustrated and tells me, "Just go get the damn flashlight. I can't come off this ladder until I can see." With shaking hands, I lit a candle and slowly made my way to the basement stairs. I stood at the top, quivering like a leaf in a thunderstorm, trying to convince myself to be brave. 13 steps. It's just 13 steps. 11 down, 2 to the right, and that's where the flashlight is. You can do it. You can do it. I took the first step, then the second and third, fourth, fifth. On the 6th step, I lost my footing and fell the last 5, extinguishing my candle. Now I'm in the basement alone, in near total darkness. I start to cry. The only light at all is coming from the tiny egress window, about a foot above my head. There is, because of this tiny window, about 1 foot square of sickly yellow light coming from the streetlight outside. I jump into that square of light because it felt like my only source of safety. My thought was, get to the light and you'll be able to see the flashlight. The problem with that, what happens when your eyes are adjusted to the dark and you step into the light? Exactly, you pretty much go blind. Now, it wasn't much light to begin with, but it was enough to junk up my vision. So here I am, standing statue still, silently sobbing in this little square of light, waiting for my eyes to adjust again. I'm terrified, and my eyes are playing tricks on me, making the shadows swirl and twist into monstrous shapes. My mum calls me. "The flashlight! What are you doing?" came Mum's voice through the vents. "I fell. I'm coming," I yelled back. I could see now. The flashlight was about 2 feet away on the workbench where Mum said it would be. It's within reach. Mission almost accomplished. I start to psych myself up. "You just gotta step out of the light for a second, and then you'll have the light in your hand," I tell myself. I leap and close the gap between me and the workbench. I grab the flashlight and flick it on and sweep the beam across the basement. At first, I felt silly. I'm 8 years old. I shouldn't still be afraid of the dark. I giggle at myself and sweep the flashlight across the basement again. Then I froze. In the beam of my flashlight, in the kneel and pray room on the other side of the basement, there's a girl. She had long blonde curly hair. She wore a blue lacy dress that came down to her knees, and in her hands she held a single yellow flower. Most notably, she appeared to be soaking wet. I began to tremble. I can't even scream. My voice caught in my throat. You know the shutter walk thing you see ghosts do in movies, where 1 second they're across the room and the next second they're right next to you? That happens. In the blink of an eye, if I could have blinked, she was right next to me. "Hey," she whispered. That unlocked my legs and my voice. I tore out of the basement screaming bloody murder and didn't stop until I was at Mum's ladder. "What's the matter with you?" she asked me, coming down. "There's a girl in the basement," I yelled. She tutted. "You were the only girl in the basement. I honestly can't believe you're still buying into the boogeyman." "It's not the boogeyman. It's a girl, and she's down there. She said hey to me," I insisted. "So you're scared of people saying hello now?" Mum laughed. "She was not a person, Mama. She was a ghost," I said matter-of-factly, miffed that she didn't believe me. "A ghost?" she laughed again. "Come on, let's go see your ghost." She grabbed the flashlight and my arm and started pulling me downstairs. "Don't make me go back, Mama. I don't want to see her again," I cried. "Don't be ridiculous. I'm going to show you that it's all in your head. You probably saw a dress on a hanger or something. Let's go." She led me back to the basement door, where I tried to bolt again, but she insisted. "We'll go down and fix the fuse, then you'll see that it's your imagination." We go down into the fuse box room uneventfully, though I'm still horrified. She fixed the fuse, and all the lights came on. I start to feel silly again. "There now, see? Nothing to worry." I noticed she's looking over my shoulder at the floor. I go to turn around, but before I can, Mum grabs me. "What did the girl look like?" she asked. I described her. When I say the part about being wet, Mum goes pale and lets me go. I turn around, only to realize little wet footprints are leading from the kneel and pray room to where I had been standing in the light. This is one of many stories I have about this house. It was the most haunted place I've ever been. My mum always said she never believed in ghosts before this house, but it made a believer of her. Parts of these stories are first-hand, and parts have been filled in by others. I thought I would give you my favorites. After the initial manifestation, it was like the house exploded with activity. It started with phantom footsteps on the stairs, up and down, all night long. We got used to this pretty quickly. It just became part of the house's personality. Then came the voices. After midnight, you could never quite be sure if your ears were deceiving you. When they began, it was like a radio stuck between two stations, a lot of garbled sounds with the occasional word coming through. Gradually, over the course of about a month, they became more intelligible. We began hearing full conversations coming from the living room, knowing full well everyone in the house was upstairs. We tried several times to sneak down and catch an apparition or something, but no matter what, by the time we reached the middle step, the voices would stop. A couple of months go by, and we are regularly experiencing phantom steps and voices. Random things going missing and turning up somewhere totally random, taps and knocks, etc., but have yet to catch another apparition. My mum started a new job, working nights, so she always missed all of the activity and explains away the rest. She couldn't explain the ghostly girl in the basement, but she's sure if she thought about it hard enough, she could come up with something. This part is relayed from her to me. One night, I came home from work early, around midnight, and it sounded like you were all in there in the dark having a party. I was mad that your dad let you stay up so late, so I busted in the front door, ready to chew you all out, but the living room was empty. All the lights were out, and you were all sound asleep upstairs. I just thought I might have been hearing neighbors or something, and carried myself upstairs and got into the shower. While I was showering, I heard what I thought was one of you young girls going down the stairs, so I hollered and told you to get your ass back to bed, and I heard footsteps run up the stairs and towards your room. I didn't hear anything else, so I figured whoever it was went to bed, and I finished my shower. I got out and I was drying off when I heard the footsteps coming up the stairs this time. I thought one of you had snuck downstairs without me knowing and was trying to sneak back up. I flung the bathroom door open, expecting to catch one of you in the act, but no one was there. I just sort of shook it off as the house settling and went to my room. I closed the door like I always do, got dressed, and when I went to crawl into bed, I noticed the door was open. I figured it must have latched wrong and went and closed it again. I got halfway across the room before it creaked open again. I spun around and marched over and slammed it and got into bed. I don't know how I didn't wake your dad up, but he just kept snoring. I have a hard time falling asleep, so I was laying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when out of the corner of my eye, I see the door swing open again. Now I'm pissed off because I'm thinking the latch is broken. I get up and turn on the light and go to look it over. It seemed to be working just fine, so I closed the door and pulled it real hard to make sure it stayed, and it did. Now I was curious and starting to think about all your ghost stories. So I sat on the edge of the bed and watched the door. Before long, I noticed the knob turning. I reached over and tried to wake Dad, but he just sort of mumbled and rolled over. The knob kept turning until the latch came free and the door swung open again, and this time a lady walked in. She was a little old lady, skinny with grey hair, wearing a flowery nightgown. She kind of reminded me of your grandma. I froze for a second. I was too shocked to do anything else. She stood there, staring holes through me for a minute, before I found my voice to ask who she was. She didn't answer, just stood and stared. I freaked the hell out. I started shaking your dad and hollering, and he sat up like he was in a trance and looked over to where the woman was standing. "What's the matter?" he asked, yawning. I said, "Do you see her?" He blinked real fast and squinted at her. "Yeah." He said it so casually. "It's just a lady." I was frantic at this point. "What lady?" I squealed. And then, like it really wasn't a big deal, he laid back down and immediately fell back asleep. Then I noticed she's getting closer. She wasn't walking though, more like gliding, I guess, and she glided right up to me and then through me into the closet. It was like I was paralyzed. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe or scream or anything. It got so cold in the room that I could see your dad's breath. The woman then glided back out of the closet and back across the room and out of the door, swinging it shut behind her. Once she was gone and the door closed, I gasped and gulped air like a fish out of water. I was trembling and had never been so terrified in my life. But I'll tell you what, I know ghosts are real now. Personally, I've never experienced this old lady ghost, but I know Mum's fear is palpable when she talks about it. I experienced run-ins with several apparitions in that house, my sisters too, so often that we named them. There was a no-face lady, the Peepers or Peekaboo Men, Tommy, and Cigar Man. We decided the girl in the basement was named Laura because she looks like Laura Ingalls. My dad was a very spiritual man who taught us to live alongside them in peace. Some of them were scary, yes, but we never experienced anything malevolent at all. Most of the time, it was like they were wholly unaware of us. No face lady. My younger sister was 4 at the time, and the first to see her. She started appearing to her about a month after we moved in. She told us about her, telling us a lady came into our room at night, but for a while, no one else saw her. After my own run-in with Laura in the basement, though, I was totally willing to believe her. I asked her what she looked like. She said, "She has no face." "What do you mean she has no face?" "No eyes, no mouth." "But she has a nose?" She pauses to think about this. She touches her own nose. "Her nose has no holes." She starts getting restless, and I can tell that she's done talking about it, so I don't press her anymore. But that description absolutely terrifies me. At this point, we're already experiencing phantom footsteps and voices. I've experienced a full apparition, and now so has my sister. I firmly decide we've moved into a legit haunted house. I bring these concerns to my parents. Mum, as you know by now, isn't having any of it at this time. Dad was more receptive. He believed that we believed it. And although he hadn't experienced apparitions himself, he had experienced the voices and footsteps. He explained to Mum that kids were more open to things like this, and that she should be more open-minded. She, of course, just shrugged it off. She's stubborn. Anyway, another month or so goes by, and one night, I wake up in the wee hours of the morning to find my sister bolt upright in bed, staring towards the door. "What are you doing? You're supposed to be asleep," I said, still groggy. She shook her head and pointed towards the door. "She's here." Instantly, I'm awake. I flip over and sit up, and in the doorway, a tall woman with long, dark red hair is standing there. The longer I look, the more I realize everything about her is off. Her fingers are grotesquely long, her skinny limbs don't quite fit the equally skinny body. But most striking is, just like my sister said, she doesn't have a face. It's like a blank slate with indentations where typical features would be. She looks like something attempting to be human, but not quite making it. That sort of uncanny valley vibe. I freeze, I guess, which is my default fear reaction. I still do it. She pays us absolutely no mind whatsoever. She sort of drifted into our closet and back out, over to the window, and then back to the closet and out of the door and down the stairs. The next day I told Dad, and he contacted a friend who said to sage our room. So he did, and we never saw her again. This took place in the early 2000s, in an apartment I lived in with my parents and my brother. Before I tell the story, let me just describe what my room looked like. It's relevant to the story. My room was pretty basic. Imagine a square. On the bottom of the square is the entrance to the room, and to the left, on the same wall, is a built-in closet with mirrored doors. On the left wall is a daybed-style bed. It looks like a fancy couch. On the top wall is the window, covered with Venetian blinds. I always close the blinds when I go to sleep, and they were in the down and closed position, and the room was pretty dark. This is important to note. On the right wall is my computer desk and some shelves. When I would lie in bed, my head would be towards the window and my feet towards the closet. I can see the windows from the closet mirror when I look towards my feet. Alright, so to the story. It was an early Saturday morning back in the early 2000s, and my mum comes into my room and places the cordless phone near me on my bed. She does this because the answering machine we have is not good enough for her, so she needs me to answer the phone when she's not home. Makes total sense. My mum places the phone near my head and tells me she's going out with my dad, and to answer the phone if it rings. Me, barely conscious of her even talking to me, grunt my assent and go back to sleep. Around 10 o'clock that morning, the phone rings. It's my friend, let's call her Jenny. She has a bad habit of calling me every Saturday at 10 AM to wake me up because she's bored. No matter how many times I asked her not to call me so early, as it was my only day off during the week, and I like to sleep in, she still called every Saturday at 10 AM. I groggily answer the phone, and this is the short conversation we had. Hello? Hey, how's it going? What are you doing? Do you want to meet up? I'm sleeping. Come on, let's meet up. I'm bored. Do you want me to come pick you up? Give me a bit of time. I'll fully wake up and call you back. Okay, don't take too long. I'm bored. Uh-huh. I hang up the phone, roll over and fall asleep. For about 5 seconds. That's when the room floods with light, with a whooshing sound. I open my eyes and look down towards the mirror at my windows, and the blinds are now open. You know how Venetian blinds have one string for pulling the blinds up, and another stick that you twist in order to open and close the shutters? Well, the shutters were opened in the blink of an eye, just whoosh, and they were open. I jumped to a sitting position instantly, with my arms over my head as if I'm being held at gunpoint, blinking, the bright daylight suddenly streaming in through the window, screaming to an empty room, Okay, I'm up, damn it. I picked up the phone and called Jenny, and fully awake now, I said, I'm ready, you can come pick me up now. She said, Okay, great, I'll call you when I'm downstairs. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I told her, don't worry about it, I'll be there waiting already. I changed clothes at the speed of light and ran out of my bedroom and downstairs and spent the next 15 minutes smoking furiously until Jenny arrived. Later that day, when I got back home, I was calmed down enough to see what the hell happened with the blinds. I mean, if they were open and they fell down, I'd blame gravity or a cheap string that held them together. But they were opened in the blink of an eye. They went up against all known physics and forces of nature. They went up. I know the blinds were down beforehand because I had already been woken up twice prior to that happening, and the room was dark. Usually, to open the shutters, you take the stick thing and twist it about 20 times to get them fully opened. I never, and I mean never, was able to open them that fast myself. I even put the stick thing between my palms and tried rubbing them really fast in one direction to get them to open that fast, but no, it didn't work. It only opened a small fraction at a time. That stick thing does not open the blinds that easily. It's been around 20 years since that day, and I still can't figure out what the hell happened. I guess it was a friendly spirit who knew that I would sleep for hours or more and make Jenny just wait and wait. Also, more likely she'd have called me back a few times, and I'd hang up each time with a promise to get up, just in order to fall asleep again. An accurate description of what would probably have happened. They know me well. So the spirit decided to save us both the trouble and just wake me the hell up. Maybe the walls between realities or space-time or whatever was thin that day, or in that apartment, and so, in one reality, I went back to sleep, while in the other parallel reality, I actually got out of bed and opened the blinds and went on with my day. I really don't know. this is not the only poltergeist activity that has happened in that room. I used to sleep with a nightlight on as I became scared of the dark after a bunch of experiences. That day made me realize that ghosts or spirits don't need darkness in order to haunt or interact with you. What do you think? Now, I don't know a ton about the history of my childhood home, but I know that it was old as hell and one of the creepiest places I have ever lived in. It was a 4-story house. Fancy, right? With lots of dark spaces and long stairways. Basically, it was really big. There wasn't a moment in the house that I felt like I was truly alone, and there wasn't a hallway that felt truly empty. I was just barely out of toddlerhood when I started to develop severe anxiety. I was afraid to do anything alone. I was always checking behind me, sleeping with my head under the covers, seeing things, hearing things, you name it. I'm almost 100% sure that there was something paranormal making me feel that way. I wasn't the only one seeing and hearing things though. My older brother shared a room with me, and he always slept on the top bunk. His bed was maybe a foot away from the ceiling, and the attic was right above us. He told me that some nights he'd hear adult footsteps right above his head, just circling the attic. But it gets weirder. He has told me that at one point he woke up next to a shadowy figure, just lying in bed with him. He claims the figure had 2 white specks for eyes, and that it wasn't acting malicious, just lying there silently. This might have been some sort of sleep paralysis hallucination, but considering the other events, I wouldn't be surprised if it was some kind of spirit. And now on to the worst one, the playroom. That room was the creepiest thing in the house, and I get shivers just thinking about it. It sat at the end of a long hallway on the top floor, just below the attic. My room was down the hall from it, and it was always pitch black. I remember staying up at night, staring at it, just in case something moved. I often couldn't take my eyes away in fear of something appearing if I did. Somehow, every time I looked at that doorway, the door was wide open. And the door wasn't weak either. It worked perfectly fine and wouldn't open unless you turned the knob. I'd ask my dad to close it before I went to bed, and it would stay closed for a bit until it just slid open again. I'm not a door specialist, but it was just arguably creepy. But wait, there's more. Now that we're older and out of that house, my brother and I found out that we'd shared a terrifying experience. We both saw something incredibly creepy in the same place. I remember it vaguely. It was a small, neutral, glowing white face in the playroom. It looked a bit like a little kid from my memory. It had no body, just a pure white face in the dark. It was around my height, and its eyes were kind of just not there. I don't remember much, but I remember it was the single most terrifying thing I'd been through. I don't know if I hallucinated or what, but I know it felt incredibly real at the time. All I remember is seeing that face, getting scared, and running back to my bed. I don't think I screamed, but I seriously don't remember. I kind of love and hate thinking about it, because it makes my hair stand on edge. So this took place many years ago when I was 16 years old. I still remember it like it was yesterday, or maybe last year. I was hanging out with my boyfriend at the time. Let's call him Kyle, but that's not his real name. And we were all alone in his apartment, just him and me and his cat. It was all very innocent, I promise. We sat in his bedroom at one point as he was showing me some pictures that he had drawn. I didn't even know he was artistic. We hadn't known each other very long. His bedroom had a bed on the left wall, back against the wall in the middle. Just left of the door was a closet, and across the room from it was the window, and on the right wall sat a big computer desk. I'm sure those of you who lived in the 90s will remember these desks. Big surface, a few shelves on top. Underneath the desk was space for the tower on one side and a set of drawers on the other. His desk had 3 drawers on the left side underneath, and of course we all remember the sliding keyboard slots. Kyle walked to the desk and pulled out the drawer completely. Now, these drawers don't pull out all the way, they have a stopper. If you want to remove the drawer, you have to pull it all the way and then lift it up and pull it out. This becomes important. After pulling out the drawer, he set it on the bed and showed me all of his drawings. They were amazing. I was floored. The drawings were all of people and faces, but I remember one in particular. It was a pencil drawing of a hand holding a pentagram, which is a 5-sided star. The 3 top points each held by the pinky, middle finger and thumb. The other 2 points pointing downwards towards the ground. The pinky had a couple of blood drops falling from where the point of the star had broken the skin, and there was a small puddle of blood underneath the hand. It was really an amazing drawing. Anyway, we put all the drawings back in the drawer and slid the drawer back in place and went to the living room to watch TV. We made some lunch at some point and went back to hang out in the living room. After a little while, we heard a loud crash from the bedroom, and I mean loud. We both said, "What the hell?" We looked at each other, and Carl said it was probably the cat knocked something over, and got up from the sofa to check it out. When we looked down, and the cat was asleep on the carpet right in front of us. He was there the whole time. Weird. We went to the bedroom, and we saw the drawer upside down on the floor, and papers littered the whole room. I mean, it looked like a tornado had been through there. The room looked trashed. We were shocked for a few seconds, but then Kyle just picked up the drawer from the floor and we began putting everything back and slid the drawer back in place. He checked the drawer to see if it falls out if pulled, but it only stopped as usual. We thought, well, that was weird, and returned to the living room. A couple of minutes go by in silence as we're both pondering what the heck just happened, when suddenly the cat, who was still curled up asleep on the carpet, woke up and his fur just exploded. He looked feral and twice the size he was a second ago. Cats do that when they feel threatened. He started hissing at seemingly no one, so we followed his gaze, and it was in front of him, about halfway to the ceiling. He then started growling and pounced in the air so high I was stunned. He just kept jumping in place, trying to catch something that looked just out of reach. And by out of reach, I mean the ceiling. We just sat there, staring. Suddenly he took off towards the bedroom via the hallway behind us and screaming, growling, and yowling the entire time. Seconds later, he's running and jumping into the living room, jumping off the walls to make a faster turn around the corner and through to the galley kitchen towards the dining room. The galley kitchen had an entrance on one side of the living room and one on the other near the dining room and the balcony door. He ran back and forth through the kitchen to the dining room a few times, and then finally, one final time, he stopped right in front of the balcony door. He stayed there a few seconds, panting, fur still raised, tail between his legs, snarling. Then, suddenly, as if nothing happened, he curled up by the door and went to sleep. Kyle and I were glued to the couch the entire time, nothing moving except our heads and eyes. As soon as the cat calmed down, I said, bye, and left the apartment. Now, I know some people would say that the cat probably saw a fly or something like that, and he was just chasing it and having fun. Those of you who have had cats would know that is just not true. I've had many cats throughout the years, and I have seen them play with flies and insects. This wasn't it. Anyone who has seen a terrified cat would tell you, this is what we witnessed. Thank goodness this cat was so territorial that he defended both his territory and us. I just kept thinking of the big knife Kyle used earlier for lunch, and it sent shivers down my spine. If whatever it was can fling a full drawer, it could probably fling a knife. I never went back to Kyle's house. This may also have been the last time we saw each other, I don't remember now. I tried to find him in recent years on Facebook, but haven't been successful yet. I'm wondering if he remembers this day. I will start by saying, even having these experiences, I've always been a skeptic. My mother, who passed 9 years ago, was toward the end of her life a deep believer, as well as both of my sisters, though after my mother's passing, they've not spoken much on the subject unless asked about it, but they can verify 3 of the 4 stories I'm about to lay out there as well. The first 3 of these stories takes place in my childhood home, in a trailer park that always seemed to have an odd vibe about it in general. Never found anything weird out about it, but we always had this theory, like Indian burial grounds or something, though I doubt it, just a weird little rural area in southwest Michigan. The 4th story takes place at my father and stepmother's house, about 8 miles north of the house the first 3 stories take place in. I'll start with what I feel is the least intense, moving on to the ones that still spark great fear in me. Story 1. I'll start with the story at my father and stepmother's house, as it's pretty simple. I lived there in my early 20s and had the classic downstairs basement room. I was the black sheep of sorts, so it was only fitting to put me there. We had a dog that always stayed with me, especially when the family was out doing whatever. This happened multiple times, but I'll share the last time I remember it happening. I'm sitting downstairs hanging out, YouTube or whatever I was doing, when my dog, like he normally does when people come home, starts going nuts, barking and pacing for me to let him upstairs so he can greet whoever he believes came through the door. As I get out of my chair to let him do so, I hear the classic footsteps of what I believe is my little brother, as they're too fast to be my father or stepmom. I hear them go all the way back to the back of the house and stay there. So I let the dog out and I follow suit, thinking maybe my folks need help grabbing something they may have brought home. I get upstairs, nothing at all. Lights off, no one home. The dog is even thinking, well, what the hell? Now, at this point, this is the 4th or 5th time this has happened in the few years we'd been living there, mostly starting in the latter part of those years. So this time, I felt ballsy about it. I decided, like an idiot, to go ask if anyone was there. No answer. So I go further into the house, facing the hallway leading to the back of the house to a couple of bedrooms. I put myself in the bathroom so that when I yell at it, I won't see down the hallway when it comes to get my sorry ass. But I get in the bathroom, and like an idiot, I somewhat angrily yelled, "Who the hell is in my house?" At this point, I hear something fall in the back bathroom between the 2 bedrooms. I poke my head out to verify no one is there, check the garage to see no one is there, and then back downstairs where I waited for people to actually come home. It's not the wildest story ever, but eerie to me. Story 2. This is where, to me, these stories amp up and really get freaky. Just something about this trailer park and the trailer I lived in. This was after living in the same trailer with my mum, who my dad then took over after their divorce and was now living there with my stepmom. So I remember it being maybe 2006, I was maybe 13 or so, and at the time, loved being up late, as it was summer vacation from school. And this summer, I liked smoking pot with my sister late at night in the backyard with the neighbor boy. This night, no pot, just us three hanging out smoking cigarettes and talking. For some reason or another, my sister takes her phone out and for some reason starts recording an audio file. This was on a rubbish Nokia phone at the time, and the quality is already bad on these, but recording nonetheless. Not for anything paranormal, but thinking about it now, I don't remember for the life of me what she was trying to record. Point is, as she was recording, we are all three standing there, when all of a sudden, about 2 to 4 feet to my right, we all hear the most unsettling, blood-curdling, just nasty woman scream for a solid 2 seconds. Immediately being like, what the hell was that? Even getting so worked up that we called the police, who didn't find anything after showing up 20 minutes later. Best part? My sister the next day realized she had been recording this audio file, so she goes into her phone to review it, realizing she had never thought to stop the recording, but there it was in her phone. We listened back to it. Everything is normal. You can hear us talking right up until this scream, which, when this happens in the recording, you hear us go quiet, then a very static type silence, and then you hear us all go, what the hell was that? And then the recording cuts off a few seconds later. But with how loud it was, and how close it was, that sound should have been on this recording, and it most definitely was not. Now, I have had a hard time with these last 2 stories, as they are the only visual experiences I have, and to me, are the absolute hardest to explain. It kind of leaves me feeling out of my wits, even thinking about them, let alone about me typing it all out. So story 3. My mum was always a night owl, no exception, even when we lived with her until 2005. I think it was somewhere around 02 or 03. The bedroom I was in was right next to where the kitchen was, and you in fact could see right into the kitchen, but couldn't see the table where we sat from here, as the angle cut off that view, but it would have been off to the right of the bedroom door looking out. I remember waking up about 3 or 4 a.m. or so, and looking out and seeing the dining room light on, and hearing my mum using her sewing machine at the table. So I yelled for her to come in there. I heard the machine stop, and she comes to the doorway. I just remember the most menacing, horrifying, mean look on her face as she just stood there, staring right at me. No words, no nothing, just this look of, why the hell are you talking to me right now? I don't really remember at this point if I said or did anything while she was stood there doing this, but just as quick as she was standing there, she just as quickly, still with no words at all, just turned her head away first, and then her body followed suit, and then she just walked away. This, as most would assume, is very much unlike most anyone's mum. I very much remember as soon as she was out of sight, I started screaming and crying, and yet again, I hear her get up from her sewing machine. This time, a little more frantic, she comes in asking what's wrong. With the classic mum calming down horrified kid going on, I told her what I'd literally just seen, and she said very plainly that she had not been in here, and that she had been sewing the whole time, and it's not like my mum to just come in and stare me down menacingly like that, especially at 3 in the morning to scare me. Story 4. My least favorite of these. I don't like even talking about this one, but it's the one I wanted to bring here most, as I just want to know what others may think this thing is. So again, much like the last story, it's about 3 or 4 in the morning. I'm in the same exact bedroom, bottom bunk. Sister is on the top bunk. This time, everyone is asleep, all the lights in the house off, and it's pretty quiet. I hear what I believe is a slightly heavy load in our dryer, or maybe in the washing machine, a little off balance. This sound wakes me all the way up because it just seems weird. So I roll over to get more comfy and I open my eyes a bit. As I'm looking around, I see what is some movement towards the kitchen. Now, again, you can see from this room out into the kitchen, but not the dining area. What you saw from my perspective is the island in the kitchen where the sink was, and you could see a little of the far side of our living room behind that. So I'm kind of scanning the kitchen, listening to this weird sound I keep hearing, and that's when I see it. I can't say it was standing, as I saw no legs, but kind of stood behind the island, but extremely tall. It was this very plain, almost 2D looking man, all white, no features whatsoever, no face, no nothing. As you looked down his body, it appeared to be more faint, but still a definite white figure or person just stood there. At first, I'm thinking it's headlights hitting the window from a car outside, but then I realized that this thing has a cowboy type hat on, and not only that, it seems like it's taking this hat off and tipping its hat in my direction, like it's tipping its hat at me almost. Now at this point, I'm genuinely trying to make sure I'm 100% awake, and I am. So I go back to looking because naturally, I just can't look away now, and it keeps repeating the same exact movements over and over. Pulls the hat down, puts it back on, pulls it down, then back on. All the while this weird sound is still happening. So I'm trying to justify it in my mind by thinking somehow the neighbor kid is playing a prank on me and is somehow outside the window that's a bit behind this thing using some sort of puppet or something. But when I realize how stupid a thought that is, that's when I started screaming. My sister wakes up and asks what the hell's going on, and I then tell her exactly what I see, and I ask if she sees it too. Oddly, no, she doesn't at all. This makes me scream more, this time waking up my mum, who, as she comes into the kitchen, turns on the light. It disappeared in that moment, though I still hear the strange sound, so I ask my mum what the sound is, and if the washer was going. She goes and looks. Neither machine is running, and for whatever reason, this woman takes one look at me, feels my head to see if I have a fever, which I didn't, and then tells me I have a fever, and that's why I'm seeing stuff like that. So I try to calm, and she leaves the room, and turns the kitchen light back off, and sure enough, there this guy is again, still tipping that hat over and over. I managed to roll over and fall asleep somehow after. I still mention this story to my sister, and she still very vividly remembers every bit. I always said it was a hat man, but the thing is, what I've read and heard on the hat man, it's not anything like this. My mother later also recounted this story, and later told me that though she didn't see or hear what I did, she only told me I had a fever and stuff to calm me down, and that she knew it wasn't a fever causing it. Anyone have any thoughts? Until a few months ago, I was a massive skeptic, but recently I've had enough stuff happen to me and learned stuff from my mum that is making me a lot more open-minded, and to the point that I'm moving out of my place. I want to see what people think, and if you can think of any ways to debunk this, then please do. For context, I'm turning 25 in May, and until recently viewed this stuff as rubbish and always brushed it off. I live in North Wales in the UK, just 5 miles outside of the Snowdonia mountain range, in a town with a university. I've learned recently, after weird stuff has really kicked off, we are directly on something called a ley line. My understanding is they're channels of energy across the world, I live alone in a converted chapel that's been turned into apartments that borders the main roadside and some broadleaf woodland on the other. And I'm not on medication or do drugs, and my flat doesn't share any walls with any other apartments or have anyone above me. For some background, when I moved into my current place 4 years ago, other residents would claim they've had encounters or seen stuff in the building, but put it down to them being biased, as it's a chapel we all live in. For the first few years, I felt randomly uneasy, like at night, if I want to get a drink from the fridge, I get out of bed, feel like I'm being watched, and felt uncomfortable enough that I decide to go back to bed instead. But again, I put it down to living by myself in a creepier setting. There was one time I thought I saw a shadow figure, but I went out drinking that night, got back home, left my lights on and passed out on the sofa, then suddenly woke up and thought I saw a figure standing over me, looking into some of my frog tanks. I just told them, feel free to look at my frogs, but don't be a weirdo, and then passed out again. This memory stuck with me for some reason, but I've always put this down to me being drunk. To be honest, even now I do, but thought it was worth noting. But yeah, had a few things on and off, but dismissed it. Then I got my dog, and over the last few years, every now and then, he'd randomly be set off by one corner of my room. He'd be growling, barking, hackles up, and if I tell him to be quiet, he won't. And if I try to walk in my bedroom, he'll block me and not let me in. Not turning to face me, but stepping in front of me and not letting me pass while still going nuts at the corner. Then, all of a sudden, like the snap of a finger, he'll stop and go back to being fully relaxed and hop back into his bed. Then when I got my cat, there would randomly be times where the dog will do this while the cat is staring at the same spot, fur all puffed up and screaming, hissing and spitting, and again, randomly like a snap of the fingers, they'll both stop and settle down and act like nothing happened. But I never really thought too much of it, as it would happen so sporadically, like we might get 2 or 3 months of nothing. Recently, things have started changing. Back in January, I started being woken up at some point between 3 and 3:30 AM by the dog, standing over my body, going nuts at the corner, and the cat at my feet doing the same screaming, hissing, fur puffed up, etc., and they won't stop if I tell them to. Then, again, all of a sudden, they stop and go back to sleep. But rather than being every few months, it was happening once or twice a week. So the first big thing. One night, 19th of January, I was walking the dog late down at the woods, around midnight. It should be noted that it was a clear sky, a full moon night, so good visibility, and the path is a straight tarmac path, about 100 meters, with only having trees on one side and a tall 4-meter wall the other side, as it borders the estate castle, so it's not like the path bends. And normally, I put one earpod in to listen to music, but when I reached the entrance, for some reason, I just decided not to have any earpods in. I wasn't feeling on edge, just a passive, nah, not gonna put them in. I walk like normal for 10 minutes, then the next sequence of events all happened in the space of a few seconds. My dog goes running off the path, barking and going nuts at something. I look in the direction he's gone in. I then turn to look at the path ahead of me, and I swear I saw a tall figure, I'd guess around 7 feet tall, standing about 15 meters ahead of me, and it was the darkest shade of black I've ever seen. As I'm looking, it fades away. Not blink and it's gone, but faded in front of my eyes. The legs and arms first, then the torso, then head. For a split second, I figured it was my eyes playing tricks on me and my vision just readjusted. But then my dog comes sprinting out of the woods and runs to the spot where I thought I saw this thing, and he just stands there, frantically barking and going nuts. I decided to carry on walking, because if I'd turned back the way I came, I'd be in the woods for another 10 minutes. Plus, when I exit, I'll still be in a very dark and secluded area for an extra 5 minutes. But if I carry on straight, in under 5 minutes I'll reach a side path that takes me out of the woods, straight onto the main road and at the entrance of a housing estate. I get past the point where my dog is standing and barking, and then my dog follows me. A few seconds later, I suddenly feel really cold, but I put that down to the placebo effect from what I had gotten into my head at this point, and then I feel something following behind me. And like 1 meter behind me, my dog turns around and starts barking again. The whole time I'm walking, he's right next to me, but he's walking backwards, constantly barking. I don't turn around, but I pull my phone out, and I had 0 signal or 4G. And that's the first time I've been without it ever, and I go on wild camping a lot, and my phone is on 8%. When I checked it 10 or 15 minutes earlier, when I was initially going to connect my AirPods, it was over 60%. I didn't turn around to look behind me at all. This carries on until I go under the bridge that the main road goes over, and like a snap of the fingers, the dog stops barking and potters off, does a wee, and acts like nothing happened. Once I'm in the housing estate, I let myself freak out and had 4G again, so sent some voice notes to a mate to see if he's awake. I didn't want to phone in case he was asleep. And everyone who heard them says they've never heard me terrified like that. And it's what really got my skeptic friends thinking seriously about this, as I'm not someone who gets scared easily. And when I am scared, I'm good at hiding it and dealing with what's happening. Like when we went camping in Sweden and bumped into a bear. I just went up to it yelling and squaring up and got it to back off. And when we've had 2 guys try to mug us in Manchester at knife point, I carried on walking towards them and called their bluff and told them to actually do something or screw off, and they backed off. Since that night, things have gotten worse in my place. The animals waking me up and kicking off at the corner has been happening up to 5 nights a week. I've been waking up to these weird scratches on me. I checked it's not the dog or cat. No matter what angle I try, I can't make the same scratches with my nails. There's nothing in my bed and no springs poking out that could cause it, and it's weird positions like my thighs, inner, back or top of the thigh, the top of my feet and toes, the side of my body as well as arms, etc. 2 weeks ago, the same thing, dog and cat kick off, and at that point, I'm just angry. So I get out of bed, go into the corner and just say, "If I could touch you, I'd smack you. Now get lost." And the dog and cat suddenly stop, so I go back to sleep. A few hours later, I fell out of bed. Maybe I rolled out of bed, though it's a double. But what was weird was my blanket was still on the bed, and my dog was over me, barking at that corner. And my cat was by my head, screaming and puffing up, staring at the corner, and my spare wardrobe door was wide open. The wardrobe was empty. But maybe if I rolled out, the sudden noise and movement freaked them out, and maybe the vibrations from me thudding caused the door to open. Then, a couple of weeks ago, in the afternoon, my dog and cat were at the groomers. I was on FaceTime with a mate, and my bedroom light turned off, including the actual switch clicking and changing to the off position. I go over and turn it back on, turn around, and I hear the click and the light turned off. I turn it on again. Then, as I sit back on the bed, it turns off. This goes back and forth for a few minutes, until my friend on the call suggested just leaving it off and see what happens. About 1 minute goes by, and it turns back on, and I see the switch flick. Then, a bit less than a minute later, turns off again. I go to turn it back on, and this goes on back and forth. Then, after about 15 minutes from when it first turned off, it suddenly stops. I've not had that issue since. I'm pretty freaked out, but keeping it inside, and I phone my mum saying I need to stay at hers for a few weeks. I checked the trains, and I had 6, 7, 8, and 9 p.m. left that day. I aimed for the 7 p.m. I pack everything I need in my general backpack, which looked fine, get outside, and walk about 50 meters. Then all of a sudden, my main strap broke. It was an old backpack, but it looked and felt fine when I was packing. But maybe the stitching on the underside was worn, and I overpacked the bag so it broke. So I missed the train and go to grab my hiking and camping backpack that was on the same hanger as the other one. But before checking, I quickly chucked something into the oven as I hadn't eaten that day yet and figured I'd have time. I go to grab the other backpack and it's not on the hanger. After frantically looking for ages, I find it in the empty wardrobe. Maybe I put it in there when packing my original bag and forgot, but it was just weird as I haven't used that wardrobe since I lived there. By the time I repack, I don't have time for food, so I just pull it out of the oven and leave. I make it to the train station and suddenly have that dread of forgetting to do something. In this case, I couldn't remember if I turned the oven off, but ignore it, as I'd never left anything like that on before and have lived alone since I was 16. I'm always paranoid about fire, as I keep a bunch of frogs and snakes etc., so always make sure the dryer, oven, washing machine etc. is off before leaving. I reach the point I'm too stressed and have to go back to confirm it, missing the 8 p.m. train. But this time, I actually did leave the oven on. Obviously, it's probably from me being stressed and rushing, so I must have forgotten, but that's not like me, and while it probably is coincidence, I couldn't help but feel dread in my gut, feeling like something didn't want me to leave. I make the 9 p.m. train, and when I was at my mum's, I felt fully relaxed. Then, this past weekend, my mum decided to come down, and the first night she was down, I had the best night's sleep I've had in that flat for months. But she said she had one of the worst night's sleep she's ever had and was convinced something was walking about in her room. She said she didn't turn the light on, but could hear footsteps etc. And the instant she walked in my room, she pointed to the corner. She also told me the whole time she was here, she could hear white noise or static. I had a talk with her, thinking she was a skeptic, and hoped she would dismiss it as me being stressed or in my head, but instead told me she's had encounters and needed to tell me about some stuff when I was a kid. She told me she 100% believes in the paranormal, which is why she raised me and my sister to heavily view this stuff as BS, because she felt something evil was in our childhood home. My sister and I found our mum on the floor from falling out of the attic when I was 5. We were told she just fell off the ladder when coming out of the attic, but she told me to phone my grandparents as they can confirm the marks on her, so I did, and they confirmed it. In a nutshell, she went into the attic one afternoon. It was well lit because of a skylight, and she found a wooden box, opened it, and found burnt sage, cat remains, melted candles etc. inside. Looked around, and on one of the joists there was loads of little burn marks, 6 inches apart. She goes to the ladder to leave, and when her shoulders and above were still in the attic, everything went black. She said she was still conscious, just vision-wise went black, and felt a pair of hands grab her shoulders and push her out, and she had really deep hand grip marks on each shoulder, which were the marks my grandparents confirmed to me. She also thinks the thing from the attic tried to target me, and she took me to a medium who said I was high at risk to this sort of stuff. As a kid, I had really bad insomnia, and would have really bad hallucinations, audio, tactile and visual, which until this weekend, I put them down to me having an active imagination combined with sleep deprivation. These hallucinations were so bad sometimes, I'd hurt myself without realizing it. The worst one I remember was when I was about 7. I was leaving the bathroom and went to run out, but the door didn't open, and then I saw a decomposing hand, like when it's been in water for a while and is all bloated, etc., reaching out of the toilet towards me. I panicked, so didn't pull the latch to unlock, instead pulling and pushing. Then I felt the hand, which was cold and wet, grab my ankle, and I started clawing at the hand to get it off me, but it never let go, and eventually I fainted. When I woke up, there were claw marks in the door. My nails popped off, and my ankle was shredded up and bleeding badly. Interestingly, all of my hallucinations would start in the bathroom, and the attic door is in the ceiling of the bathroom. I had always dismissed this, but my mum told me this weekend the insomnia and hallucinations only started after she fell out of the attic. She also told me there were times she'd find me talking to nothing but full-on conversations, asking her who is the guy in the house with us. She also told me about her direct experiences seeing things, sensing something horrible on a girl that she was friendly with at school. She was almost feeling ill around her. Then the girl started asking the teacher in a religious studies lesson about ghosts, what happens if you do seances, etc. She then talked to people at a local church, and she was off school a few days, and when she came back, was completely back to normal, and my mum stopped feeling sick around her again. But yeah, that's my situation. If anyone has any thoughts, please say, because I won't lie, I'm starting to feel like I'm going crazy.